The barn crouched at the edge of the ranch like a wounded animal, its wooden ribs creaking under the weight of the wind. Dust floated thick in the air, stinging Eli's eyes and coating his tongue with bitterness. He tasted fear, sharp and dry. His bare feet pressed into the cold dirt as he stood in front of his sister, blocking her from the man who owned this land and, it seemed, their fate. Mara was 9, too small for her fear to make sense. Her hands clutched the back of Eli's shirt, fingers shaking so hard he felt it through the thin fabric. She didn't cry loudly anymore, just soft, broken sounds, like she was afraid even tears might anger the man standing across from them. Calder stone filled the doorway. The rancher's shadow stretched long and dark across the barn floor, swallowing the children's feet. His boots were polished, untouched by the dirt he forced others to work in. A coiled rope hung from his hand, thick and heavy, swinging slightly as if impatient. "Your father knew the terms," Calder said, his voice calm in a way that was far worse than shouting. "Debts don't disappear just because men do." Eli's chest tightened. Their father hadn't disappeared. He'd ridden off weeks ago, chasing work, chasing hope, chasing anything that wasn't this moment. Eli lifted his chin, even though his knees begged him to fold. "She didn't do anything," Eli said quickly, his voice cracking despite his effort. "She's just a kid." Calder's gaze dropped to Mara. She shrank under it. "I don't collect guilt," Calder replied. "I collect payment." The rope swung once more. That was when Eli felt something inside him harden, fear turning into something else. Something steadier. He took a breath that felt too big for his small lungs and leaned forward, just enough to make it clear who stood first. His voice came out as a whisper, but it carried. "Spare my sister," Eli said. "Take me instead." The wind died. Even the barn seemed to listen. Mara gasped. Calder stopped moving, and in that frozen moment, a boy made a choice that would echo far beyond the walls of a dusty barn. For a moment that stretched too long, Calder Stone didn't answer. The rope in his hand stopped swinging. It hung limp now, as if it, too, was waiting. Calder's eyes remained fixed on Eli, sharp and measuring, the way a man studies a horse before deciding its worth. But something had shifted. The certainty he'd walked in with, cold, practiced, had cracked. "You," Calder said at last, the word rough, almost disbelieving. Eli nodded, though his throat burned. His heart hammered so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. He didn't turn around. If he looked at Mara, he knew he'd break. "You're barely tall enough to reach the fence latch," Calder went on. "What makes you think you can replace a dead man for a grown man?" Eli swallowed. "I can work," he said. "I don't complain. I learn fast." Calder let out a short laugh, humorless. He took a step closer, boots grinding into the dirt. Eli forced himself to stay still. "Running wouldn't save anyone. Every boy says that," Calder muttered. "Until their hands blister and their backs give out." His gaze drifted past Eli, to Mara. She stood frozen, eyes wide, her face streaked with dust and tears. Calder's jaw tightened. Something flickered there, recognition, unwanted and sharp. The barn groaned as a gust of wind pushed against its walls. The sound dragged Calder backward in time. He smelled iron and hay, heard another door slam, another child crying. He shook his head slightly, as if to chase the memory away. "You know what this place does to boys?" Calder asked quietly. Eli hesitated. Then he nodded once. "It makes them grow up." Calder stared at him, really stared now. Not the size of him, not the weakness, but the way his shoulders were squared, the way fear hadn't sent him to his knees. "Growing up isn't the same as surviving," Calder said. Silence swallowed the barn again. Heavy, expectant. Mara made a small sound behind Eli, a breath caught between hope and terror. Calder turned away, just for a second. His hand brushed the pocket of his coat, fingers pressing against something solid beneath the fabric. His expression hardened, not with cruelty, but with restraint. When he faced them again, his voice was lower. "You don't know what you're offering." Eli finally spoke the truth he'd been carrying since the door first opened. "I know what I'm losing if I don't." Calder Stone said nothing, but the rope slipped from his hand and hit the dirt with a dull thud. Calder stood with his back to the children longer than necessary. The barn felt smaller now, as if the walls had crept closer to listen. Dust motes drifted through a beam of late afternoon light, settling on his shoulders like quiet judgment. "You want to know what this place does to boys?" he said at last, his voice stripped of its edge. "It teaches them how to endure. And how to lose." He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, so slowly that Eli tensed, unsure if another threat was coming. Instead, Calder pulled out a small silver locket. It was scratched and dull, its chain worn thin from years of handling. "I was younger than you," Calder said, eyes fixed on the metal. "Didn't even have a ranch then. Just a father who borrowed too much and drank even more." He flipped the locket open. Inside was a faded photograph. 2 children standing barefoot in a field. A boy with the same sharp eyes Calder had now. And a girl, smiling wide, her hand gripping his sleeve. Mara gasped softly. "That's your sister?" she asked before she could stop herself. Calder nodded once. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped beneath his skin. "When the men came to collect," he continued, "I hid behind a fence post. I watched her beg. I watched them take her." His voice faltered, just barely. "And I told myself I was too small to stop it." Eli felt the weight of the locket like it was pressing on his chest. "Did she?" He couldn't finish. "No," Calder said sharply. Then quieter, "She never came back." Silence poured into the space between them. Calder snapped the locket shut and held it out. Eli hesitated before stepping forward. When his fingers brushed the cold metal, Calder's hand trembled. "You stood where I didn't," Calder said. "You spoke when I stayed quiet." Eli shook his head. "I was scared." "So was I," Calder replied. "That's the worst part." Mara wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "Then why do this?" she asked, her small voice steady. "Why hurt people like us?" Calder exhaled slowly, like a man admitting defeat. "Because pain doesn't disappear," he said. "It waits. And sometimes, it turns into something ugly." He straightened, resolve hardening. "Not cruel, but final." "Today," he said, looking at Eli, "you reminded me of the boy I buried." And for the first time since he'd entered the barn, Calder Stone looked ashamed. Calder Stone stared at the children as if seeing them for the first time. Not as debts, not as burdens, but as lives balanced on a moment. The barn felt strangely still, the air heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. He reached for the rope again. Mara stiffened behind Eli, her breath hitching. Eli's hands curled into fists. Whatever was coming, he wouldn't move. But Calder didn't lift the rope. Instead, he pulled a knife from his belt, short, sharp, practical. Eli's heart lurched. Then, with a swift motion, Calder cut through the coarse bindings around their wrists. The fibers snapped, falling away like shed skin. "You're free," Calder said. For a second, neither child understood. Eli flexed his fingers, staring at them as if they might vanish. Mara let out a sob, half shock, half relief, and wrapped her arms around his waist. "But the debt," Eli started. As finished, Calder interrupted. "It ends here." He turned toward the open barn doors, where sunlight spilled in, bright and unforgiving. "I built this ranch thinking control could erase regret," he said. "That if I held power, I'd never feel that helpless again." He paused, shoulders sagging. "I was wrong." Calder faced them once more. His eyes were wet, though no tears fell. "This land doesn't need fear to run," he continued. "It needs hands that know why work matters." He studied Eli carefully. "Not today. You're still a boy. But one day, if you choose, you'll have a place here. Both of you will." Mara looked up. "Together." Calder nodded. "Always together." Outside, the wind shifted, warm now. The barn no longer felt like a cage. Calder reached into his coat one last time and placed the silver locket into Eli's palm. "Keep this," he said. "Let it remind you that courage spoken out loud can change more than one life." Eli closed his fingers around it, feeling its weight, and its promise. As Calder walked away, his steps were slower, lighter. He didn't look back. Eli held his sister close, sunlight washing over them, understanding something new and powerful. Sometimes the bravest act isn't sacrifice, it's mercy, finally chosen.